You want the best for your child. K-12 can help them gain the skills they need to reach their full potential while giving you the support you need to get them there. K-12-powered schools are tuition-free, accredited online public schools for students in kindergarten through 12th grade. Their state-certified teachers make online learning interactive and engaging, allowing your child to learn at their pace from the safety of home. Join the more than 3 million families who've chosen K-12. Go to k12.com/podcast today to learn more. That's k12.com/podcast.
You got problems that you ought to be concerned with. Moolah! You don't know how you're supposed to earn it, or what to do with it, or how to keep it. You're a freak with a dark, shameful secret. But you're not the only one. Get your hidden financial fears with a blast of sun. Now your healing has begun. It's Bad with Money with
Gabe S.
Dunn.
Hello and welcome to Bad with Money, a show about finances and feelings where we don't talk down to you. I'm your host, Gabe S. Dunn. And with me today, we have Joel Goza back. Hello. Would you like to explain a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Well, Gabe, first of all, thank you for having me back, man. It is good to be with you. I am a writer and a professor of ethics at the HBCU Simmons College of Kentucky. My last book was Rebirth of a Nation, Reparations and Remaking America. I also continue to write on places like Substack and other places and really kind of have a focus on the intersection of race, politics, economics, and, all the stuff you can't talk about at family dinner.
Yeah, so how is that going right now? I haven't really seen anything since you were last here. So just curious, how is all...
We live in a different world than last time we talked, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, you were quite optimistic when we spoke last time. But so how has watching the last, let's say, month and a half gone for you?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and when we talked, I was doing my book tour and my book was on reparations, and so, we had felt that Vice President Harris was going to win. Not confident, but we felt it and we were very optimistic. And then it was just this gut-wrenching moment, when the election results happened. But what was interesting for me when we go back to last fall, last winter, at the end of 2024, is that shortly after the election results came in, I don't think I'd ever been more grateful to be a part of the reparations movement, in that I went to a conference with folks committed to reparations. There's an organization called First Repair. And what was so meaningful to me in that moment was because it was a reparations conference, I was surrounded by people who had been a part of the movement for their lifetime and whose imagination was not election cycles, but it was a deep commitment to what do we have to do for the rest of our life. And it was in no way kind of all sunshine, optimism, this is no big deal. I mean, it was looking at the challenge deeply in the face, and yet knowing that how we respond to this challenge is how we continue to move forward. And so to be in a circle with folks who just have this deep-seated spirit of defiance was medicine for the soul that I needed. Now, that doesn't make anything easy, but it does make the fight possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always curious in terms of context. And I often will ask my parents, because my dad was hippie dippy guy, still is. And I always ask them, is this the worst it's been? Because I think we lose sight of that in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
They were around for Vietnam. My dad, not in the United States, but my dad came over with his mother. And she came over from Belgium or Poland or France, unclear. Mm-hmm. She liked to spin a tale. And so that came over from World War II into the US during Korea and Vietnam. And so I'm like, is this the worst? I always ask them, I'm like, is right now different? Sure. Is right now different? And they have said that it is in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they're just remembering the past fondly. They are also both white, but they have said that this is uniquely. So what were you hearing from the people who have been in this fight for a long time?
Yeah, we had the honor of bringing William Barber into Louisville and, just kind of sitting and listening with him, some friends and I. And one of the things that he took this back to was the Dred Scott decision. And so the year is 1857. Slavery is more entrenched in this year than it has ever been. Not only is it more entrenched, but it is heading in a way where it's going to entrench all the more deeply. Because what Dred Scott does is it says that, there are no rights that a white man has to respect of a black person, And so what that means is that slavery is not only a Southern thing, a Southern state thing, that this thing is universal. And it is into the code of law. And what happens in this moment, I believe it's Sojourner Truth looks at Frederick Douglass and she says, Frederick, is God dead? Is God dead? And because it might be the case that God is dead, has died, and he has left us to our own devices. And of course, both of them are, deeply committed Christians. And yet what it does is in that season between the interrogation of Sojourner Truth and the speech that Douglass gives on the hills of Dred Scott is his opportunity to really think this through. And what he says is that, well, truth is truth, justice is justice, and those things never lose their power. And in fact, this can be the beginning of the change that we've been fighting for all along, And by the time that he says these words, they've been in the grind for 30 years, And so the truth is that you are talking to somebody who thought that Harris would win, right? So like, I can't predict the future. However, what we do know is that in moments of impossibilities, we have this thing called the white flag, right? And what you can do with the white flag is you can raise it up and you can quit, and you have evidence on your side that now is the moment to raise that white flag. But what Sojourner Truth and what Frederick Douglass did is they burned it. That's what they did with the white flag. And so when we look at the situation that we're in, we have to, when they burned the white flag, they are on the hills of deeply painful change, deeply painful change. But they had made a vow to fight, and they were going to keep that vow to the day they died. And so we have these examples, to the question of whether or not this is the worst that it's ever been. There are things that are absolutely unique to this nation. But I can tell you in 1865, there wasn't 70 million white people that were ready to vote for a black woman for president.
Yeah.
In 1965, there wasn't that many folks, and so both realities are very real.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword because we talk often about the civil rights movement in this way that is very sanitized. MLK was gentle, Malcolm X was violent, which, you know what I mean? The most like simple, pared down situation.
Yeah.
And even then it's like we revere Martin Luther King saying, oh, racism is, it's certain people are like, oh, racism is over because of that, or racism is over because of Obama. Nothing has happened to Obama, but it's like, well, they shot MLK. Like,
yeah, right. They killed the Prince of Peace. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you think of people that got elected, you think of the Kennedys, right? That people thought that was sort of a turning point. We weren't even ready to vote for a Catholic. We voted a Catholic and killed that guy. So it's like,
yeah.
It's like, I imagine then it felt bleak, but like the impact that those people had. But then it makes me like, okay, who people are going to have to go through a lot of violence in order to come out the other side, if we do come out the other side.
Yeah. And I think that if we do becomes a question mark. And I say that, very, very sincerely. Like, I mean, it is perilous times. However, even the way that we frame our understanding of history, shows the type of work that has to happen during this time. So like when we think about our thoughts of MLK, for instance, this peaceful MLK, well, who shaped our thoughts on MLK was not MLK, but it was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the one that does MLK Day, does the misremembering of the type of radicalness that there was.
Reagan is the core of everything bad. It always comes back to Reagan.
Yeah, it does. It does. I write a lot about Reagan in Rebirth of a Nation. But why that is important in our current moment is that, there is this interesting movement afoot of where, and this is not unique to our times, right? But what is the problem we say the problem is always out there, right? Mm-hmm. So like you'll have a writer and, not to, name drop and demonize, but a writer like David Brooks, who will write, right? Who will write about, I was a part of the Reagan Revolution when we were about ideas, when we were about this, that, or the other. Well, the people who did Project 2025 are the exact same people that did the Reagan Revolution. It was a mandate for leadership. It was basically the same document. This is not the first time they've tried to kill the Department of Education. They tried that under Reagan. And which is great for Democrats because they can say, oh, you Republicans, this is what brought us here. Well, that's great as long as you didn't vote for Bill Clinton, because in many ways, Bill Clinton becomes worse than Reagan on a lot of issues. And so what we want to avoid in this time is the serious type of reflection and repentance that this time is really calling us to. One of the things becomes interesting in the civil rights movement, and when you think about the folks who did this, it becomes only more interesting. Like if you take a letter from Birmingham prison, what King will write about is the self-purification that they went through to engage in the work. Now, what becomes interesting when he's writing about this is that they were the victims of the crimes.
Right.
They were the victims of the crimes, and yet they still felt this need to enter into a river of repentance and reflection and to marinate about who they had to become for this present moment. Now, if you take that paradigm and you put it on somebody like me, right? What does it mean for somebody like me to do the type of work that I'm supposed to be doing right now? What does that type of repentance look like? Can I afford to say, well, the problem is a David Brooks?
Right.
Maybe, maybe not. Right. I mean, the truth of the matter is that in these type of times, there's almost nobody that's innocent, particularly, folks with my color of skin, my sexuality, my all the above puts me into this type of I've been complicit with the road that has brought us here. But the good news with that is that if we've been complicit with the road that has brought us here, we can also be complicit in a road that takes us in a different direction.
Very recently, I used Indeed to get hired for a part-time job. The employer put their job listing up on Indeed. That's where I found it. I applied through Indeed and I got the job. Indeed made the hiring process so easy. I was able to search for all kinds of jobs based on my skills and being able to look at really easy to read descriptions from the jobs about what they were looking for in a candidate. If I needed to hire someone again, I would absolutely use Indeed. And I also have been telling everyone when they've been saying that they want to look for a job or they don't know where to find a job, I was like, you got to use Indeed. I've literally told like 4 people like, oh, I found this job on Indeed. That's where you should look if you're looking to find a job. And the job I was looking for, they needed someone really quickly because they were growing so fast. So they needed to hire the right person very fast, and it was so important. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other job sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. And it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. I sincerely love Indeed. I went on there. It was incredibly easy. I literally got hired in September for a job actually using Indeed. I know this is a podcast ad, but I mean it. I really did use Indeed. I really do recommend Indeed. It all happened so fast, and I didn't even have to really stress. I found what I wanted. I got the job. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there are no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. How fast is Indeed? In the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. And if you're looking to hire, you need to use Indeed because you'll find people like me. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/badwithmoney. Just go to Indeed.com/badwithmoney right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/badwithmoney. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
You want the best for your child. K-12 can help them gain the skills they need to reach their full potential while giving you the support you need to get them there. K-12 powered schools are tuition-free, accredited online public schools for students in kindergarten through 12th grade. Their state-certified teachers make online learning interactive and engaging, allowing your child to learn at their pace from the safety of home. Join the more than 3 million families who have chosen K-12. Go to k12.com/podcast today to learn more. That's k12.com/podcast.
It's the people that have the most need to do that reflection that don't. It sounds silly to be like, I'm interested in history, but like I've grown more and more attached to connecting things. And I remember attending in high school protests against George W. Bush and the Iraq War and protesting in favor of helping in Darfur and things like that. And then I remember people that were opposed to that, but then they would say what happened at Kent State was terrible. Or, it was like they're not connecting the dot. Like, think about the people that were hippies, protesting Vietnam, and then now criticize the pro-Palestine movement. Like, they don't understand. I don't know how to explain that while this is a unique time, there is nothing new under the sun. You're going to look back and realize that it's like that meme from Mitchell and Webb where he's dressed as a Nazi and he goes, wait, are we the baddies?
Yeah, right. When people think about the hippie movement, right?
Yeah.
So my background is Southern Baptist, and one of the things that became interesting in the hippie movement for me is you had these people who were, burning their bras, doing whatever, who were so much morally superior than the tradition that I came from, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Outside of their stand on Vietnam, they don't do a damn thing, So
Right.
Stokely, Woodstock is more segregated than a Klan rally.
Looking back fondly, it's a very misogynistic movement.
If you want to know what Woodstock is, it's the seedbed for the Reagan Revolution.
Ooh.
And Stokely said it. He said, man, don't worry. They're going to put their ties on soon,
Ooh.
And they do. Right. And this is what I'm trying to say is like within this moment, and I'm not talking about a lot of people repenting, but if we can look and see the ways in which we have been complicit, then maybe the gifts that we have used for the wrong side of history, we can begin using for our own redemption. But if this moment doesn't make people radical, if this moment doesn't do the work of repentance, and the type of social changes that are needed, then it is a moment that is missed, And again, I agree with you wholeheartedly that often the people who need to repent the most, people like myself, are the least likely to do that. But repentance was never about getting a majority, That's never what social change has been about. There is a power in the 1%. The 1% who decide to burn the white flag, decide to go into the work that is needed. And that 1%, when you look at history, it's been as powerful as any wars, it's been as powerful as any elections. And the truth is that we are surrounded by power. The question becomes is what type of work begins to release it?
I guess there's a moment of feeling quite helpless. The helplessness is perhaps what breeds the deification of Luigi Mangione, and who gotta say made some points. It's like what are we to do when it's all conflated together to like, yes, they're trying to get rid of the Department of Education, but we have not been in the situation where there's so much widespread misinformation and so much ability to radicalize people through the internet. And so, it's like kind of unique in that I think it's making people helpless. And so they're becoming more extreme, whether on the left or the right.
And, maybe we can say a couple of things, So what becomes clear is that Luigi killed less people than health insurance companies
100%. Oh, free Luigi.
And yet he did so by becoming somebody who killed.
Right.
And we have to decide what type of people we want to be in this moment. When it comes to a sense of helplessness, it might be a sign that some serious self-care is needed.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, helplessness, as long as it's not the period in the sentence, is a part of the process. As long as the helplessness isn't, I don't have any strength left, but I have strength to raise the white flag. There is something that you can do with helplessness, But when you look at the type of misinformation, it is true that the internet is unique, but the misinformation has been an intentional piece of the propaganda machine for our nation's history. So go back and you read history books. If you read history books before the Civil War, what ends up happening is you don't write about slavery.
Mm-hmm.
You read George Bancroft. He will finally start writing about slavery, and what does he do? He places all the responsibility on the British, right? And he becomes the leading historian in the 1800s. You go and you read Bailey from the 1900s, and he has an intentional project of painting America as a beacon of democracy. Now, he is doing this in a time when murder's legal. Lynching is, they will not pass legislation to defeat lynching. If you look at what they do in Nazism, they steal our propaganda machine,
right.
And yet, even when we think of Nazism being this kind of holistic German movement, that's the product of the propaganda machine that helped create those type of illusions.
Right.
And so false narratives are not new. The internet is new and unique. But the other thing that is very unique is that you didn't have the type of wide-ranging information of people who looked like a John Hope Franklin writing history.
Mm-hmm.
Today you do. Who is now president of the Organization of American Historians? It's Annette Gordon Reed, who made her name talking about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And so there is an ecosystem in this nation that is perfectly designed to do the work that it's been doing, However, the resistance hasn't been silent in all of this. The tools of oppression are new and they're more powerful, as are the tools of liberation,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Gabe, you wouldn't be allowed on the air just because of who you are.
I'd be in an asylum.
Yeah.
I think about that all the time. I had a boyfriend who was very, very tall, like freakish, not in a nice way, freakishly tall. And we used to joke. I used to be like, it's so cool that we met now, because if we met in like the 20s, we would be in a freak show.
Yeah. No. I mean, absolutely. And so the pain people are feeling now is very real. The fear and the terror is very real, and it can't be minimized. The question becomes is, how do you take care of people who are hurting right now?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That is part of the work that we have to do. And there will come a time where what we have been through and what we have journeyed through becomes fuel for the resistance, Before that, you've got to survive. You got to survive, and sometimes the work of survival is a full-time job, and that people don't need to feel guilty if that's where they're at. They shouldn't feel guilty at all.
I've definitely been radicalized, and also I know that keeping us in survival mode, keeping us worried about money and rent and jobs, and creating a situation where people are forced to give birth. And people in the U.S. during World War II were like, oh, we just didn't know. We didn't know about the Holocaust. We didn't know. But it's like, now we do know. So what the fuck are you going to do about it? It's so interesting when I hear whatever you're doing right now is what you would have been doing during Nazi Germany. I don't know if that's true, but it does feel that way. And so you do feel slightly insane, like drinking your coffee and then reading about people getting sent to a prison in El Salvador. You're like, what the fuck do I? And it's myself and a friend of mine, Sarah Marshall, who does the podcast You're Wrong About, we were talking about the phrase those who fail to learn history are doomed to repeat it. And we were like, here's the thing. Even those who learn history are doomed to repeat it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But it does become interesting, I mean, and in my first book, I write about it at length, but, the letter from Birmingham prison, I mean, it's brilliant, And one of the things I found so offensive in the letter when MLK said, if I was in Nazi Germany, I would be standing with the Jews. And I'm like, how can you possibly say that? You
don't know.
But then you look and you see what he did.
Yeah.
And he earned his right to say that because he knew what he was doing during those times.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, if you are trying to do the work of caring for people who are persecuted today, there's a chance that might have been what you were doing in Nazi Germany,
It's true.
of taking care of the folks who did it. And where you are at when the stakes seem low might change when the stakes get higher. But, we learn more about ourselves on a daily basis. And some of what we learn, we don't like. The ability to wrestle with that and to grow from that, I think, becomes critical during this moment.
What are you seeing people physically do? Like, what can you do?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's an interesting thing. So I'm coming from Kentucky. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that has been a war is on, Black students. And what ended up happening is that here in Kentucky, to historically hold this special day with U of L, these other white colleges that honored Black graduates, and the Black graduates, it would be a school function where we come out and we kind of do our thing and we celebrate. You might have an endowment, but an endowment can't buy courage, right? And so Trump comes into office and everybody begins pulling back. So what do Black folks do? We're going to do it without.
Yeah, they throw their own.
And they throw their own celebration. They bring in the Black graduates from different colleges, to celebrate. What did the churches do? The Black churches didn't flood the mall. They just stayed out of Target. And so you begin seeing the type of resistance. You look at what happened with the editorial editing at Washington Post. Instead of y'all cutting our paycheck, we'll just, connect directly with the readers, and we're going to create these alternative means of getting together.
Right.
And so, all these things are sparks. I think that there was a time of self-care, a time of reflection. You see, I mentioned William Barber, and I mean, he said, he's like, man, I ain't going marching. When the inauguration happens, this is what he said. He said that, this is the time for deep prophetic listening, and I don't understand what's going on. Last week, well, I've been praying, and now it's time to take this thing to Congress. I'm ready. And we live in a world with such quick feedback. We're tempted to believe that those who are most reactionary are most revolutionary. And what we learn during times like this is that, I think that this election was significant enough where it transforms lifetimes. The type of timeline I think that we've got to think in, for the work that we are doing as far as those who are committed to root our democracy more deeply in human dignity and decency. And we got to be strategic. We got to take care of ourselves, and we got to take care of each other. But we just can't raise the white flag. That's the only time that it becomes over.
I have a Substack now too. I have like few pieces that I, every so often will contribute to and see what I start writing more about. And I have something I'm working on about how I had a bunch of different financial things happen. And so I have a day job at a customer service job. And It's interesting because the last couple months, friends of mine have said, oh, are you going to go to this protest? Or this thing is happening today. Or this, we're going to do this today. And I'm like, I have to work. And so I'm trying to work on something called, I can't go to the protest today. I have to work. And it's interesting to think about the people who would most want to go to this type of thing or be affected by what's getting protested, who can't. Or who my coworkers who don't even really think about the future because they got to get through like the day,
Yeah.
or they've had, you know, a lot of trauma or certain things where they just, and it's not, oh, they're privileged so they don't have to be interested in politics. They're just, in their heads, none of this has ever done anything for them, so who cares?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure how to counter that.
It's interesting. You know, my last Substack, I actually wrote on CRT and kind of what the history of that was, you know, and I talk about the history of, you know, how America tells history, you know, all this kind of stuff. And obviously CRT has been kind of this umbrella term to demonize a whole movement. But when you trace it back to its founder, it's a guy named Derek Bell, lawyer. He's the first Black tenured professor at Harvard Law. He'll become dean over at Oregon. And he works with people like a Thurgood Marshall, you know, and sitting there on the front lines. And he worked for a long time on school integration. And what he became convinced of is we got everything wrong. And so what the critical race theory says is, he says, you know, there will be these moments in time. There will be these moments where white interest and Black justice converge. And in that moment of time, you will have temporary gains. He said, but other than that, racism is permanent. It is integral to the system. Now, when you think about somebody like a Derek Bell, and this forms, Michelle Alexander refers to Bell's work as her Bible. You know, it reforms a whole generation of activism. And for Bell, what he was writing about wasn't about the death of hope. What he was writing about was the spirit of defiance and that the struggle itself, and it's ennobling. And what he wanted his students to not have to go through is the season of optimism he went through, where he thought that, you know, we're going to make progress and then it's going to be, you know, mission completed. Is how do you stay in the saddle for a lifetime? And so when you look at Bell, I think Bell would say something like the folks that you were talking about, those who are fighting to survive, is never forget the fight to survive is a noble thing. It's a noble thing. And yet, despite all these impossibilities, what Bell holds the door open for is miracles happen. They happen all the time. You don't know how long it will last. You know, some changes are long and meaningful, and some changes seem to die on the vine. Life is happening. And I think that we have to learn how to relish the lives that we have, take all the joy that we can from the daily struggle, and commit ourselves to craft the type of future that we want to live in.
Yeah, it's just interesting to be kind of in two worlds for me right now, where it's my friends who have the luxury of going to protests and have the ability to kind of spend the time doing these things, and my coworkers who didn't graduate high school or, you know, come from the foster care system, and it's kind of impossible to get them to, even though they are directly affected more so than any of my like white friends who are working at jobs where they get six figures and go to these protests. I do this show. It's about finance. I have said to them, like, are you putting money in a 401k? Do you guys have high yield savings accounts? Like, about these things, because I guarantee nobody is. And they kind of think that I'm silly. Like, they kind of are like, you're a nerd, which sure. But it's also this thing where it's like, well, I don't know shit about shit. Like, why would I be I tell them this stuff, and then I know that what do I fucking know? And it's so interesting to watch the people protesting for these things that then it's like they don't really interface with the people that are affected by it, really. And so the people that are affected by it know that and feel that way. Like, for instance, okay, this is like so bizarre, but like, you know, there's a protest going on for May Day. It's shutting down the city. I don't realize that it's May Day, and I'm opening the store. And so I get on the bus because I don't have a car. I get on the bus and I'm taking the bus to work, and the bus is slow because of the protests. And I'm going to be late for work, which I opened the store. So that means that everyone else will be late because I can't open the store. And I'm going to get a demerit, like I'm going to get a strike and possibly be on the chopping block to be fired because of this protest.
Yeah. it becomes really interesting. So last weekend, folks out of Kentucky might not have realized this, but it was the Kentucky Derby, and there are few events in the world, I think, more than the Kentucky Derby. And it's because I live in West Louisville, and the folks from West Louisville don't necessarily think about the Kentucky Derby in the same way that folks in East Louisville do. My wife will work a lot with the unhoused. They will try to make the unhoused disappear during Derby time.
Oh, they're doing the Olympics in LA. And I'm like, it's like the Olympics. It's so multicultural and you can see, and Simone Biles and stuff. And then it's like, okay, but they're going to sweep and they're going to disappear the homeless during the Olympics.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was funny because I was listening to a chef, talked to us when we were, I was at a restaurant, and he was talking about what they were doing at the Kentucky Derby. And they were marinating bacon in $1,700 bottle of bourbon. They had literally shaves of 24 karat gold mixed into the bacon. And I'm just like, oh, this is just absolutely insane. If we could focus for 1 week taking care of our issues here in Louisville, like we focus on the Kentucky Derby, we could create the New Jerusalem. I mean, just no doubt. And yet, part of what we have in a society that was by design divided by race and wealth, the question becomes is how do you create the type of relationships that make transformative change possible? And, how is it that you bring together with those who are in the grind, And so, when Sinners released, that's the Mississippi Delta. But these are the folks that formed Fannie Lou Hamer, and as much she was simply trying to survive, there comes this door, and somebody like a Fannie Lou Hamer is provided a platform. And I guess I say all that to say that, one of the good news is within people who know the history of social changes is that that you don't have to have answers beforehand, and that a lot of the things that are going to be happening, a lot of it comes from strategy and from critically thinking.
It's also holding two things. Like, I see people shit on the Met Gala, which I do agree with, that it is tone deaf. But then I saw someone else saying you lose sight of what the Met Gala is, which is a fundraiser for the arts, fundraiser for the museum. And so they're like, well, then it's just devaluing preserving art and history. And I'm like, yes, okay, I can see that. You don't think the arts and history deserve to be fundraised for. But I also fucking hate the red carpet of the Met Gala.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to say that you love the arts and you hate the Met Gala,
Right.
There was a time where we publicly funded the arts.
Exactly.
And that was much more effective than what a Met Gala could ever be.
Yeah, I know. And so it's like, well, the Kentucky Derby, I don't even think there's an upside.
No, there are none.
Zero.
It's not good for the horses. It's not good for the rich folks who blow their money. It's not good for anybody.
It's just so frustrating. And it's sort of impossible. I'm finding it very impossible to bridge that gap. Be able to speak to both sides, to have someone telling me their problems who has that level of money. And then,
I worked in Houston's 5th Ward for about 10 years doing urban redevelopment work. And one of the things that I do find true with folks who do social changes, work in social change, is the type of networks that are needed to do meaningful work are very diverse networks, and what will end up happening sometimes in those networks is you create the most unlikely sort of intimacies with folks. You have people who are deeply impoverished becoming deeply close in a meaningful way with trust fund babies, And I think part of what the work of social change calls us into is the risk of vulnerability. And so, if I show up and I'm in my Brooks Brothers suit, around hippie folks, they have every right to demonize me. But what does it mean for us to carry ourselves in such a way? We're ready to be vulnerable, where we're ready to not let anybody off the hook, but to be gracious.
Share resources, redistribute your wealth to me.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Well, not to me, but you know what I mean?
No, I mean, it was a long path to getting a Brooks Brothers suit because what I would have to do. So the first ones, it was my first time where I bought it like a new suit, because I'd always bought them used. But then I learned that they had these like fire sales at the end of the year. And it was so funny because I took my Brooks Brothers suit out just this week for a funeral, and I had like an inch of dust on it. So yeah.
One thing I've learned is that men can wear the same suit over and over and over again to every event, and women have to get new outfits every time. So I don't envy it anymore, for real.
Yeah.
Where can people find you and more about you?
I am most active on Substack. That's where I try to engage most directly with Joel Edward Goza. You can see my writings. I write on DEI, I write on CRT, I write on social change, do short videos. I am also the author of a couple of books, the last of which was Rebirth of the Nation, Reparations and Remaking America. Gabe, man, it's always great to be with you, man. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course.
To speak to someone who wore a Brooks Brothers suit once this year.
I found a Calvin Klein suit that fits me perfectly for $30 at a thrift store. Weddings, funerals, everything.
Yeah, my closet is full of stuff that I was not the first owner.
But you know what? That's sustainable, baby. Bad with Money with Gabriel S. Dunn is a production of Noted Bisexual, produced by Melisa D. Monts and Diamond MPrint Productions. Edited by Diane Kang, post-production sound by Coco Llorens, production assistance by Melanie D. Watson, and music by Mike Kaplan, Zach Sherwin, and Jack Dolgen, sung by Sam Barbera. Thank you, love you, bye!
You want the best for your child. K-12 can help them gain the skills they need to reach their full potential while giving you the support you need to get them there. K-12-powered schools are tuition-free, accredited online public schools for students in kindergarten through 12th grade. Their state-certified teachers make online learning interactive and engaging, allowing your child to learn at their pace from the safety of home. Join the more than 3 million families who have chosen K-12. Go to k12.com/podcast today to learn more. That's k12.com/podcast.